Welcome back to Verified Terror. 80% of you still haven't subscribed yet. Before we start the video, please hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. March 1988, Nevada test site, 5:20 in the morning. The sun was slowly coming up and the desert was getting hot. The heat from the sand made the horizon look wavy and blurry. Our group of military vehicles had stopped on the dirt road. The engines were running, but we were waiting for permission that should have arrived an hour ago. Captain Walter Briggs stood next to his Humvee with his arms crossed. He stared at the radio like he was waiting for it to give him an answer. But it wasn't the radio's fault. All we heard was a steady, dead static noise coming from the speakers. There was no approval message. The restricted zone was completely silent. I was in the second vehicle with Sergeant Hayes. He had this nervous habit where he would tap the steering wheel with 2 fingers over and over. He did this before every patrol we went on together. This time, I could see he was tapping even faster than usual. Command had pulled us from our normal gate duty at 4 sound in the morning. There was no meeting to explain things, no list of supplies, just map coordinates in 1 sentence. Emergency rescue, priority black. This sentence told us that something had gone wrong during a test flight. It meant we were going to an area that most soldiers at the base weren't allowed to see. Whatever we found there, whatever happened, it meant we wouldn't be allowed to talk about it afterward. Hayes finally broke the silence. "You think it's another drone?" I didn't answer. The night before, the range command had launched a secret missile test over the southern flats. We heard the loud roar from 12 miles away. We saw the white streak climb into the dark sky, then nothing. No explosion report, no all-clear signal. Just silence and a red alert that locked down half the base until morning. Now we were sitting here in full gear, waiting to clean up whatever came down. Briggs walked back to our truck and leaned through the window. His face looked tense, and his jaw was working like he was chewing his words before speaking them. "We move in 5 minutes. Stay close behind me. No radio talk unless I say so. Keep your eyes on the ground, not the sky." He tapped the roof twice and walked back to his vehicle. That was Captain Briggs. He never wasted words. He'd been at Groom Lake for 8 years. He ran recovery missions in areas so secret they didn't even have names on the map. If he looked worried, you paid attention. At 5:25, the radio crackled once. We heard a single tone, high and sharp, then a voice. It sounded dry and quick with no call sign. "Move to Site Echo 12. Pick up all materials. Set up a barrier. Do not use communications until everything is secure." The line went dead. Briggs started his engine. Hayes turned the key, and we followed him onto the dirt track that cut through the flats like a scar. The drive took 40 minutes. There were no road signs, no markers, just a narrow path worn smooth by years of heavy trucks. The ground on both sides was pale and cracked, covered with low bushes that looked dead even in spring. The air smelled like sulfur and burnt rubber. That smell never left the test range. It soaked into your uniform and your skin, and stayed with you long after you left. I kept one hand on my rifle and the other on the case that held our detection equipment. Standard radiation monitor, electromagnetic sensor, and spectrum reader. These were tools we'd used many times before. Tonight, I had a feeling we'd need all of them. At 6:10, we reached the first checkpoint. It was a single pole with a faded number painted in black. Echo 12 Briggs cut the engine and stepped out. Hayes and I followed. The desert stretched flat in every direction. The pale sand was turning gold as the sun broke over the ridge. Ahead, maybe 200 yards out, I saw it. A dark shape half buried in the sand with steam rising from the edges. Not smoke. Steam, like the ground was boiling underneath. Briggs raised his binoculars, looked at the area, then lowered them slowly. "That's not a missile." His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. Confusion, maybe concern. He turned to us. "Hayes, set up the barrier." Standard spread. "Moss, you're with me. Bring the scanner." I grabbed the case and followed him across the sand. The ground crunched under our boots, dry and brittle. As we got closer, the air changed. It felt cooler and heavier. My chest felt tight like there wasn't enough oxygen. Hayes called from behind us. "Sir, I'm getting interference on the radio." "Strong signal. Can't tell where it's coming from." Briggs didn't stop walking. "Write it down." We reached the edge of the crater. It wasn't very deep, maybe 4 feet at the center, but it was wide. The sand around it had melted into glass that was smooth and black, reflecting the sky like a mirror. In the middle sat the object. It wasn't a rocket. It wasn't part of a plane. It was just a mass, solid, dark, shaped like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was roughly round, but with angles that didn't match up. The surface looked polished, almost wet. But when I crouched down closer, I saw it was bone dry. There were no burn marks, no heat damage patterns. Just cold black stone sitting in the middle of a desert that should have melted it. I set the case down and opened the radiation monitor. The needle jumped halfway across the scale, then dropped back to 0. I tried again. Same thing happened. Briggs watched without speaking. I switched to the electromagnetic sensor. The display lit up with lines, too many to count, crossing and looping in patterns that made no sense. The frequency range covered everything from low bass hum to high-pitched squeal. All of it was coming from the stone. I looked at Briggs. He stared at the mass, jaw tight. "Can you move it?" I reached out with one gloved hand and stopped an inch from the surface. The air around it felt wrong. Not hot, not cold, just thick, like pushing through water. I touched it. The stone was smooth, almost slippery. And the moment my fingers made contact, the hum in the air grew louder. Not in my ears, in my chest. A vibration that rattled my ribs and made my teeth ache. I pulled back fast. Briggs took a step closer and crouched beside me. "What did you feel?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words caught. The stone had changed. Not in shape, but in presence. It looked darker now, like it was pulling light into itself instead of reflecting it. The glass around it rippled faintly, with tiny waves spreading out like drops on still water. Hayes shouted from the barrier. "Captain, we've got movement!" Briggs stood up, rifle raised, scanning the horizon. I followed where he was looking. Nothing, just flat desert and empty sky. Then I saw it. A shimmer low to the ground, maybe 100 yards out. It wasn't heat distortion. It was something else. It moved slowly, deliberately, circling the crater in a wide arc. No sound, no shape, just a ripple in the air like the desert itself was breathing. Briggs pressed his radio button. "Hayes, hold your position." "Do not shoot," Static answered. He tried again. Nothing. The stone behind us began to hum louder, a deep tone that climbed and fell in steady waves. I looked back. The surface had started to pulse, faint but visible, like a slow heartbeat. Briggs saw it too. He didn't speak. He just stepped back, eyes locked on the mass. The shimmer in the distance stopped moving. It hovered there for a few seconds, then faded. The hum dropped to a whisper, then silence. The desert was still again. Too still. No wind, no insects, just dead air and the weight of something watching. Briggs turned to me, voice low and firm. "We're taking it back." I stared at him. "Sir, we don't even know what it is." He looked at the stone, then back at me. "That's exactly why we're taking it." He walked to the truck and came back with a heavy canvas cover and steel cable. We worked in silence, wrapping the mass carefully, securing it with layers of padding and straps. The stone stayed cold the entire time, never warming up from our touch. When we lifted it, the weight felt wrong. Too light for its size, but too heavy for the way it looked. It took all three of us to load it onto the flatbed. Hayes kept looking at the horizon while we worked, rifle slung across his back, one hand on the grip. By the time we finished, the sun was fully up in the sky. The heat had returned, harsh and dry. But around the stone, the air stayed cool. Briggs covered it with another tarp and tied it down tight. He looked at both of us, face serious. "We drive straight back. No stops, no radio unless I say so. If anyone asks what we found, you say equipment debris. Nothing else." Hayes and I nodded. We climbed into the trucks and started the engines. As we pulled away, I looked back once through the side mirror. The crater sat empty, the glass still reflecting the sky. But something about it felt occupied, like we'd taken the body but left the presence behind. The drive back was quiet. Too quiet. Normally you'd hear the rattle of gear in the truck bed, the low hum of the engine, static from the radio. Today, there was none of that. Just silence, thick and heavy, pressing down from all sides. Hayes kept his eyes on the road, both hands locked on the wheel. I watched the instruments. The compass needle drifted slowly, never settling on one direction. The fuel gauge flickered between half full and full. None of the readings made sense. I tapped the panel. The needles jumped, then froze, behind us. The stone sat wrapped and strapped under layers of canvas, but I could still feel it. A low vibration, steady and rhythmic, like something breathing in the truck bed. At 7:30, we passed the first checkpoint. The guard waved us through without asking questions. That was the rule. If you saw a recovery convoy, you didn't look twice. We kept moving, following the dirt road that wound through the test range, past empty towers and rusted equipment half buried in sand. These were relics of old programs, forgotten experiments. The desert held everything. At 7:45, Briggs radioed back. His voice came through clearer than the first time since we left the site. "Moss, how's the cargo?" I glanced through the rear window. The tarp hadn't moved. "Secure, sir." He didn't respond. A few seconds later, the radio hissed, then went silent again. Hayes looked at me. "You feel that?" I did. The air inside the cab had changed. Cooler, denser, the same feeling I'd had near the crater. I checked the scanner. The display showed static patterns, random noise across every frequency. Then, without warning, the noise cleared. One single line appeared sharp and clean, pulsing at regular intervals. I noted the frequency, 47 hertz. Too low for radio, too high for earthquake monitoring. It was something in between, something that shouldn't exist. Hayes noticed the scanner. "What's it reading?" I didn't answer right away. The line on the screen climbed higher, then split into 2, then 4, then 8. A waterfall of signals, all identical, all perfectly timed. "It's broadcasting," I said quietly. Hayes tightened his grip on the wheel. "From the stone?" I nodded. He cursed under his breath and pressed the gas pedal harder. We reached the main gate at 8:15. Briggs stopped at the guardhouse and spoke with the officer on duty. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw the officer's face. Confusion, then a nod. He stepped back and waved us through. We drove into the compound past rows of hangars and office buildings until we reached a low structure at the far end. No windows, no markings, just a heavy steel door and 2 guards standing watch. Briggs parked and got out. He motioned for us to stay in the trucks. A few minutes later, the door opened. 3 men stepped out. They wore civilian clothes and had no ID badges. They walked straight to the flatbed and lifted the tarp. One of them pulled out a handheld device similar to ours and ran it over the stone. The screen lit up. He said something to the others, too quiet to hear. They nodded, then waved over a forklift. The stone was unloaded carefully, placed on a padded pallet, and wheeled inside. The door closed behind them. No paperwork, no signatures, just gone. Briggs walked back to us. "We're done here. Return the vehicles. File standard recovery logs, time on site, coordinates, equipment status." "Nothing about the object." Hayes spoke up. "Sir, what do we call it in the report?" Briggs looked at him for a long moment. "Unidentified debris. That's all." He turned and walked toward the command building. Hayes and I sat in the truck for a few seconds, neither of us moving. Finally, he started the engine. "Let's get this over with." We drove to the motor pool and parked. I grabbed my gear in the scanner case. The device was still active, screen flickering with leftover signals. I powered it down and locked it in the equipment locker. Hayes stood beside me, arms crossed, staring at the ground. "You think they know what it is?" I shrugged. "If they do, we'll never hear about it." He nodded, then walked away without another word. I stayed there for a minute, listening to the distant hum of generators and the low rumble of aircraft on the flight line. Everything felt normal again, routine, but I knew better. Normal didn't come back that fast. That night, I wrote everything in my field notebook. The crater, the stone, the shimmer in the desert, the signals, every detail I could remember. Then I tore out the page and hid it in the lining of my locker, same as I'd done before. Some things didn't belong in official reports. Some things stayed personal. I tried to sleep, but the hum kept coming back. Not in my ears, in my chest. The same vibration I'd felt when I touched the stone. It stayed with me through the night. Faint, but constant, like a second heartbeat running just behind my own. The next morning, I reported for duty at 6 a.m. standard patrol. Nothing special, but when I walked into the briefing room, Briggs was already there. He looked tired, eyes red, like he hadn't slept. He handed me a folder. New orders. Effective immediately, I opened it. Transfer notice. Hayes and I were being moved to different posts, separate locations. No explanation. I looked at Briggs. "Sir, is this about yesterday?" He met my eyes, then looked away. "It's routine rotation. Happens every few months." I knew he was lying. So did he. I closed the folder and nodded. "Understood." He walked past me without another word. Hayes left that afternoon. No goodbye, just a packed bag and a truck waiting by the gate. I watched him go from the window of the barracks. He didn't look back. My own transfer came 2 days later. A small outpost in Utah. Quiet, isolated, far from anything classified. Before I left, I walked past the low building where they'd taken the stone. The door was sealed. The guards were different. No one spoke. I stood there for a minute, then turned and walked away. Some questions don't have answers. Some doors stay closed. Years passed. I moved through other assignments, other bases. The memory of that day stayed with me, but it faded at the edges, the way all memories do. Until one night, during a routine inspection at a radar station near the California border, I felt it again. The hum, low and steady, coming from the equipment room. I checked the systems. Everything read normal, but the feeling didn't go away. I opened my old field notebook and found the frequency I'd written down. 47 hertz. I tuned the scanner. The signal was there, faint but present. Same pattern, same rhythm. It was still broadcasting. After all those years, it hadn't stopped, and I realized then that whatever we'd found in the desert, it wasn't debris. It wasn't a failed test. It was something else. Something that didn't die. Something that waited. The hum stayed with me. Not every day, but enough to notice. It came at odd times, during equipment checks, in the quiet before dawn. Once, during a supply run through the desert, I pulled over and stepped out of the truck just to see if I could feel it in the ground. I did. Faint, rhythmic, like a pulse buried deep under the sand. I told myself it was memory, the mind playing tricks. But the scanner didn't lie. The signal was real. 3 months after the transfer, I received a letter. No return address, no signature. Just a single line typed on plain paper. Moss, call this number. 9 hours p.m., secure line. A phone number followed. I recognized the area code. Nevada. I burned the letter and waited for nightfall. At 9 p.m., I used the base communication room. I told the duty officer I needed to check in with family. He nodded and left me alone. I dialed the number. It rang twice, then a voice answered. Calm, familiar. Moss? It was Briggs. I didn't waste time with questions. Why now? He paused, then spoke carefully. You've been monitoring frequencies. It wasn't a question. He knew. I stayed quiet. He continued. So have we. The signal didn't stop. It's grown. Stronger, more complex. We need someone who's already been exposed. Exposed? The word hung in the air. Exposed to what? I asked. He didn't answer directly. There's a team being put together. Small, quiet. You'll receive orders within a week. This conversation never happened. The line went dead. I stood there for a moment, then hung up and walked back to my quarters. A week later, the orders came. I was being moved again, this time back to Nevada, not Groom Lake, a smaller facility, unmarked on any map I'd seen. The drive took 6 hours through empty desert. No signs, no checkpoints, just coordinates and a dirt road that ended at a chain-link fence with a single gate. A guard checked my ID, made a call, then waved me through. Inside, the compound was small. 3 buildings, a few vehicles, and a landing strip barely long enough for a small plane. I parked and walked to the main structure. The door opened before I knocked. Briggs stood there. Older now, grayer, but the same hard eyes. Welcome back. Inside, the room was cold. Too cold. A single table sat in the center with a map spread across it. 4 other men stood around it. I recognized one. Hayes. He looked at me, nodded once, then turned back to the map. Briggs closed the door. Gentlemen, we have a situation. He pointed to a spot on the map, a location about 80 miles north of where we'd found the stone. 2 days ago, a survey team reported equipment failure in this area. Radio's dead, vehicles stalled. When we sent a recovery crew, they found this. He pulled a photo from a folder and placed it on the table. It showed a crater smaller than the one we'd seen, but identical in structure. Black glass, smooth edges, and in the center, another mass. Dark, angular, silent. One of the men, a technician I didn't know, spoke up. How many have been found? Briggs looked at him. 17. Over the past 4 months, all within a 200-mile radius of the first site. The room went quiet. Hayes leaned forward. They're spreading. Briggs nodded. Or being placed. He looked at each of us. We don't know what they are. We don't know where they came from. But we know they're connected. The signal patterns match. Every stone broadcasts on the same frequency. And every time we recover one, the next one appears within days. The technician asked the obvious question, what do they want? Briggs didn't answer. Instead, he pulled out another photo. This one showed the interior of a lab, clean, white, sterile. In the center, on a steel platform, sat the first stone, the one we'd recovered. Surrounding it were instruments, monitors, recording devices, all of them active. We've been studying it for 3 months, Briggs said. Every test we run gives us the same result. The stone isn't dead. It's processing, receiving, transmitting. It's a relay. Hayes looked up. Relay for what? Briggs met his eyes. We don't know, but the signals are getting stronger. And 2 days ago, something changed. He placed a final image on the table. A waveform, complex, layered, unlike anything we'd seen. This was recorded at 3:30 in the morning. The stone sent out a pulse, high energy, short burst. When it ended, every piece of electronic equipment within a half-mile radius shut down permanently. No damage, no burn marks. Just stopped. The room stayed silent. Briggs continued. The stone is still active, but now it's waiting. For what? We don't know. Your job is to find out. He handed each of us a folder. You'll work in pairs. Moss and Hayes, you're on field recovery. Find the stones. Secure them. Bring them back. The others will handle analysis and containment. You leave at 6:01 a.m. He closed the map. One more thing. Whatever you see out there, whatever you experience, it stays classified. No written logs, no reports, just verbal briefings. Understood? We all nodded. The briefing ended. Hayes and I walked outside together. The sun was setting, painting the desert red. He lit a cigarette and offered me one. I took it. We stood there in silence for a minute. Then he spoke. You ever think we should have left it where we found it? I breathed out smoke into the dry air. Every day. That night I couldn't sleep. The hum was back, stronger than before. I lay in the bunk staring at the ceiling, feeling it in my chest. At 2 a.m., I gave up and walked outside. The compound was quiet. A single light burned over the main building. I walked to the fence and looked out at the desert. The stars were bright, sharp, cold, and somewhere out there, buried under sand and stone, something was waiting. Not for us, for something else, something we couldn't see yet. At 6 a.m., Hayes and I loaded the truck. Standard gear, rifles, radios, scanners, recovery equipment, and one new addition, a containment case. Heavy steel, lined with lead and electromagnetic shielding. Briggs said it would block the signal. I wasn't sure I believed him. We drove out at 6:15, following the coordinates to the second site. The road was rough, barely more than tire tracks in the dirt. Hayes drove. I watched the scanner. The signal appeared 20 miles out, faint at first, then growing. By the time we reached the coordinates, it filled the screen. The crater was fresh, the glass still warm. The stone sat in the center, larger than the first, maybe twice the size. Same surface, same dark shine. But this one felt different, active, awake. Hayes parked 50 yards back. We stepped out. The air was thick, humid, wrong for the desert. I powered up the scanner. The readings spiked immediately. Hayes circled the area, rifle low. I approached the stone. The hum grew louder with every step. Not painful, but present, undeniable. I crouched beside it and reached out. My hand stopped an inch from the surface. The air felt solid, thick, like glass that hadn't formed yet. Then it moved. Not the stone, the air around it. A ripple, slow and deliberate, spreading outward in perfect circles. I pulled back. Hayes called from behind. Moss, we've got company. I turned. The shimmer was back. Not one, 3, circling the crater, moving in sync. No sound, no shape. Just distortions in the air like heat rising from pavement. Hayes raised his rifle. I shook my head. Don't. He lowered it but kept his finger near the trigger. The shimmers circled twice, then stopped all at once. They hovered there, equally spaced from the stone like points on a compass. The hum climbed higher. My ears popped. The scanner beeped, then went silent. Screen black, dead. Hayes backed toward the truck. We need to move, I agreed. But when I tried to lift the stone, it wouldn't budge. Not because of weight. It felt anchored, rooted, like it was part of the ground itself. I tried again, pulling with both hands. Nothing. The shimmers began to pulse. Faint light, rhythmic, matching the hum. Hayes was at the truck now, engine running. Moss, now! I gave up on the stone and ran. The moment I crossed the crater's edge, the hum stopped. The shimmers faded. The air cleared. I climbed into the truck, breathing hard. Hayes didn't wait. He spun the wheels and drove. I looked back through the mirror. The stone sat alone in the crater, dark and still, but I knew it was watching. We drove for an hour before Hayes spoke. "That's the second time," I nodded. "It's guarding them." Hayes tightened his grip on the wheel. "Or they're guarding us." I didn't have an answer for that. We returned to the compound at 2 p.m. Briggs was waiting. He saw our faces and knew. "You couldn't take it." I shook my head. "It's locked in place. And something's watching the site." Briggs didn't look surprised. He just nodded and walked us inside. The technician was there, monitoring the first stone. He looked up as we entered. "Captain, we've got a problem." On the screen, the waveform had changed. The steady pulse we'd been tracking was now irregular, chaotic. The technician pointed to a spike. "This started an hour ago, right around the time you reached the second site." Briggs looked at me. "What happened out there?" I told him everything. The shimmers, the hum, the locked stone. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to the technician. "Pull up the satellite feed. I want to see every stone we've located." The screen changed. A map appeared, 17 red dots scattered across the desert. The technician zoomed in. My chest tightened. The dots weren't random. They formed a pattern, a perfect circle, 200 miles across. And at the center, where we stood, was Groom Lake. Hayes saw it too. "They're surrounding the base." Briggs stared at the screen. "Or they're building something." The technician ran a calculation. "If the pattern continues, we'll have a complete ring in 3 weeks. Briggs turned to us. "Then we have 3 weeks to figure out what they want." He dismissed us. Hayes and I walked back to the barracks. Neither of us spoke. The weight of what we'd seen pressed down like a physical thing. That night, the hum returned. But this time it wasn't alone. Underneath it, faint and distant, I heard something else. A tone. High and clean, almost like a voice. I sat up in the dark, listening. It repeated. 3 notes rising, then silence. I wrote it down in my field notebook. When I looked at the notes, they matched the pattern from the waveform. The stones weren't just transmitting. They were speaking.